Curtis Sasaki, welcome to Listening with Leaders. You are a senior advisor to LG Nova, as well as multiple other startups. And the easiest way for people to find you is to search for you on LinkedIn. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You have over a 30-year career in technology startups. And I'd like to start a little bit with a backstory about yourself and then what got you into where you are today.
Sure. Actually, I was born in Hawaii, and Hawaii is not exactly known for being a technology hub. But growing up, I always had the inkling to take things apart and build things. So I would build like tube amplifiers for audio equipment. I'd build speakers. I love like using erector sets to put things together. So that was sort of my entree into the world of tech. It was pretty low tech, but it sort of provided me with being inquisitive about discovering things.
So how did that morph into you moving into technology? I mean, did you follow an educational path that took you that way?
Yeah, so I was interested in like mechanical engineering, because, again, putting things together, taking things apart. So in college, I studied mechanical engineering, but also business. Which was really fascinating because, one of the subjects that got me really interested was advertising. So mechanical engineering and advertising, two very divergent areas, but both were super interesting for me to learn.
And how did your career progress from there?
Yeah, so after graduation, I took a job at probably one of the early computer stores based in Seattle. And they were the first stores in Washington to actually carry the Apple II. As soon as I got my hands on that, it's like, whoa, this is like something I can really get into. So I taught myself programming while working at the store. I became the actual manager of both the computer store and an audio store, which was sort of in my wheelhouse. And I actually taught programming. So what was different is, we not only sold Apple IIs, but I had to learn how to fix them. I had to learn actually how to teach people how to use it. So yeah, it gave me an interesting perspective about, products, right? It's like, it's not just how it looks, but can actually people use it?
Interesting. I learned beginner's all-purpose symbolic instruction code, basic programming, in 1969 at Dartmouth College on a mainframe timeshare computer, and we were all allocated 2K. and all the input device was either Hollerith cards or punch tape.
Yep.
And those, if you remember, in those days, that's where the term bug came from.
Yeah.
It'd be a bug on a card that'd plug a hole or do something, and you'd drive yourself crazy trying to figure out where did I make that mistake.
Yeah, that's what I used an IBM punch cards in college and programming Fortran.
Oh, Fortran, right. Mm-hmm.
So,
well, we date ourselves, don't we?
Oh yeah.
So what are you doing today? You're a senior advisor to these startups. Tell us a little bit about your work today.
Yeah, so after spending a lot of years as product marketing, product management, managing engineering teams, creating some new businesses, I wanted to sort of take a step back and kind of figure out, okay, I don't want to work so hard anymore in terms of working for big companies, but how to keep my network going, how to help other startup companies to hopefully not make the same mistakes that I had made in my past. So that's what was my going in terms of retirement, if you call it that. And I got a call from LG saying, hey, we're starting up this new innovation center in Santa Clara. They're a very, very small team. Would you like to come, be an advisor? Because I told them I didn't want to work full time. I actually wanted to support other companies which I was already helping to get going. One of the other companies, for example, is based in Seattle, and they're called Pure Watercraft. They're actually electrifying boating, both in the powertrain as well as in battery packs and they've now actually made a whole pontoon boat that's
Wow.
all electric. I mean, totally different space if you think about it. LG being more known for consumer electronics, this other company doing boating. But when you think about, there's a lot of overlap. If you think about building an electrified boat engine, what do you do with cables? What do you do with the mobile application? Right? There's a lot of product thinking that needs to happen. In LG's case, it wasn't so much about helping like build a better TV. It was really about helping the company think sort of outside the box and look at other business opportunities that hopefully by working with startup companies, they can actually, utilize LG's strengths and create new businesses, both for the startups as well as for the company.
So are you currently advising, is it called Bodhi, the company up in Seattle?
They're called Pure Watercraft.
Pure Watercraft. You'll be interested knowing that I'm one of the partners in a startup in Marina del Rey, California. And we have developed a radical new form of electric motor and generator where we are at 98.6% efficiency as either a motor or a generator. It's a third the size of a conventional motor or generator. And we use 60% less copper.
Wow.
And it's catastrophic if it's catastrophic failure proof because we don't use windings. We have a completely different technology. And it's a radial axial radial topology. So we actually have 3 magnetic fields instead of the usual 2.
Wow.
And that's how we develop the efficiencies. And we're in negotiations in the EV market right now to license the technology. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
So as I understand LG Nova, it's basically, would we consider it an incubator?
In a way it is. A lot of corporates who start incubators basically come up with ideas and then they hire engineering teams and try to internally build out some of these concepts. What Nova is doing is a little bit different. It's more what they call inside out. So rather than building large engineering teams to work on different projects, we actually work very closely with startup companies. So when I first started advising the company, the notion was let's create these competitions and have startups apply. And to I think a lot of our surprise, we had several thousand startup companies globally apply for competition. And I was like, I think one of 2 people who actually looked at every single application, video and demo. It took, weeks to actually do that. But it was important because, we wanted to make sure that the feedback we gave the startups and the ones that we actually selected were really the cream of the crop. So it takes time to actually parse it through it and actually learn quite a bit about what's happening in the overall industry. Because, when you see so many companies, maybe doing the similar things, okay, is there a trend there? And you see some companies doing things that were done maybe 3 to 5 years ago, like, okay, they're probably gonna, not do so well. So it was a lot of work, but again, it gave me an interesting perspective of sort of what was happening globally in the startup community.
And what kind of advisory services do you provide these companies?
So right now, it can be everything from, getting more exposure. It's also getting them an opportunity to work with LG. So for example, in the healthcare area, a company says, I have this technology, but I can't scale, or I can't do a pilot to the level I want to. So LG will actually help the company do that.
Well, and what's in it for LG?
Well, like I said, this inside out theory is about, okay, let's help the startups. If we see it actually growing, we actually may invest money. We may actually over time do an M&A.
Oh, okay.
Or we can put maybe 2 startups together with LG and create a much bigger opportunity.
Huh. So what is it that gets you excited in the morning? You've been around for a long time. What gets you up and say, whoa, I get to work today?
Well, I think right now for me, hearing sort of the challenges, the problems that a lot of these CEOs have, is interesting, right? Because I said, I've actually experienced that years ago. And, if I actually provide advice, then it actually helps them, work through these things. It's pretty satisfying, right? To see I actually made a difference.
And what is it you think that's unique about you that you bring to the table?
Well, I think for me, I'm a pretty humble person. I've been lucky, I think, throughout my career of experiencing lots of different environments, cultures, working for some amazing, people, including Steve Jobs for 7 years. And so I think the perspective I bring is, one of experience of actually working on some really challenging projects. I actually worked on Java in the early days and brought it to consumer devices. And in a lot of these things, people didn't really have the same belief that it was going to be successful. And, through will and hard work, some of these actually came to fruition and became pretty successful. So, but I've also worked for some startup companies that actually didn't do so well, right? I worked for General Magic, which great idea before its time, company crashed and burned, but the people who work there, they're part of my network. Tony Fadell, who did Nest, Andy Rubin, who did Android.
Wow.
Kevin Lynch, who is in charge of Apple Watch. So these are all people I work very closely with and have a relationship with. So yes, the company failed, but sort of life goes on, and you have these lifelong relationships you can count on.
Interesting. So you're well connected in the technology sector.
Yeah, I mean, some of it wasn't planned, but it turned out that way.
Wow.
Fortunately.
That is exciting. So when you're looking at these CEOs and these startups, what are the common problems that these companies and CEOs are facing?
I think some of it's common, some of it's not common. A lot of, some of these companies, one of the companies, for example, is headquartered in Japan. And they're very successful in Japan. They actually IPO'd, but how do they scale outside of Japan? Right. That's the biggest challenge.
That would be a major cultural problem, I think.
Yeah. And some of the other CEOs I talked to, for example, hiring is a problem, right? Like, how do you find the best people, especially, well, maybe now it's a little bit easier with all of the technology challenges and layoffs we've been seeing. But, I always tell CEOs that your top and first 5 hires are probably your most important. And how do you make sure that they're the right people, right? Culturally, emotionally, that you can actually trust and communicate effectively with. It's not easy.
No, it's difficult. And a lot of these CEOs don't have those skills to begin with. So they have to cultivate these skills or not. If they don't cultivate them, then, they face even more problems.
I also think, telling a CEO that over the course of maybe the company lasts 5 to 10 years, their job is going to change and their skill set's going to have to change. And sometimes they don't like hearing that, right? Like,
right.
I'm the perfect CEO.
Well, maybe you're the perfect CEO for a 10-person startup, but are you the perfect CEO for a 500-person firm that's now capitalized at $30 million and about ready to go IPO or MA or whatever? I mean, companies go through growth stages, and
right.
not every CEO who's a founder is well suited for the next level.
Yep, that's right. But sometimes it's hard for them to swallow that news, right?
Yeah. Well, you get wedded to your story, and it gets hard to let go of. This podcast is called Listening with Leaders because, as a lawyer turned peacemaker, I find listening to be the foundational skill of life. How important have you found listening to be in your career?
Oh, I think I'm more of a listener than a talker. And I think part of it comes back to, sort of growing up in Hawaii, to Asian parents who kind of drill that into your head that, you have to be humble, you have to listen carefully. But also I think, working with such brilliant people over time, it's like, yeah, you want to actually hear as much from them as possible and learn from that.
in terms of the CEOs that you work with, how would you rank their listening skills?
I think it varies quite a bit. Um, some CEOs listen for a little bit, but still they have their own opinion, right? Even though they might not actually have heard you, even though you said things that are important. Others, I would say are much harder to deal with because they really don't. They might pretend to listen, but they don't hear what you actually are saying.
That's right. Have you seen a correlation between a CEO's ability to listen and the ultimate success of the company?
Oh yeah, unfortunately, yes.
Tell me about that.
I think I don't want to name names, but one of the CEOs, all of us were saying like products too expensive, late to market, probably isn't going to do as well as you might think, right? And maybe we should pivot. And by the time, product shipped, guess what happened? It didn't sell. And the company lasted for 2 more years, tried to pivot, but it was too late to pivot.
And that's because the CEO wasn't listening to the advice.
Yeah, I mean, some like you said, some CEOs who are also founders are so wedded to their idea that even with all of the data that you see in front of you and hearing it from customers not opening their wallet to your product.
Right. So it's not only a function, as I understand listening to you, it's not only a function of not being able to listen, it's not being able to make good decisions. They have really flawed decision-making processes where they're letting a bunch of cognitive biases get in the way of making sound decisions.
Yeah, I mean, I feel for founding CEOs, right? Because they have a tough job and letting go is also not easy.
No, and it's high risk. We know that 9 out of 10 startups fail.
Right.
So it's high risk, but it's exciting. And there's always a chance of grabbing that brass ring and making a bunch of money, right? So there's a lot of motivation, but people their egos get in the way. I mean,
yeah, the thing I also learned is when you think about global companies, they're very, very different. Asian companies, for example, very hierarchical, right, in terms of communications and decision making.
Right.
Versus a Silicon Valley company, which is typically, much more a little bit more consensus building and more risk taking.
Right. And that strikes me then that the CEO, the founder, CEO of those people really has to know how to manage people, manage group decision making, and really have good emotional intelligence.
That's right.
If they're going to succeed. And those that don't fail and those that do have a better odds of getting forward because it's all about the people.
Yes. I think some of the Asian companies, though, are doing a better job of actually sending out executives to actually live globally first before getting promoted.
That's interesting. So you could take a South Korean company and they'll send their executives to Canada or the United States or Europe to work overseas to get a culturally diverse experience, cultural education, I think.
Yeah.
Describe it.
So I think that's making a big difference, whereas maybe 5 years ago, you didn't see too much of that.
Huh. I hadn't really thought about that, but it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Especially if we, globalization, who knows what globalization is today, right? but the idea, but we still do. I mean, the trading between Asia and Europe and, North America and even South America is still going on. And so, and all thousands and thousands of different cultures. It's not, there's nothing homogenous here. And so understanding what culture is and what the differences are, I think would be very important in that kind of work.
Yeah, I mean, I learned interesting lessons, right? When I first joined Samsung as a senior vice president of its innovation lab. That was the first time I actually worked for an Asian company, where I had a Korean boss in Korea.
Right.
Prior to that, all of the CEOs that I had worked for were all based in Silicon Valley.
Wow. So that was a bit of a culture shock for you.
Yeah, and for I think us in Silicon Valley, it's like you say what's on your mind. You tell it like it is. You don't sugarcoat stuff, right?
That is not the Asian way.
Yeah. And you also go through hierarchy of communications.
Right.
Well, the CEOs of several of the different divisions came over and wanted an update. And I gave them an update, right? And said it like it was. And it's not like they didn't like it. They actually appreciated it. And later on, what was interesting was some of the VPs in Korea would communicate to me and says, next time you're in Korea and you have a meeting with the CEO, could you ask these kinds of questions or make these comments? Like, I was kind of taken aback, like, why don't you do it, right? But I didn't understand the sort of the cultural difference.
Yeah, deference to authority, deference to hierarchy.
Yes.
Community comes first, organization comes first, individualism second.
Right.
It's a different way of thinking about who we are as human beings.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was wrong, but it was
No. It's just
it was just different.
So let me ask you one more question, and I'll let you go. What is the one thing about you, Curtis, that we wouldn't know unless you revealed it to us?
Oh boy. I actually love sports, and I actually played USTA tennis. And it was interesting because on my team, there were, most of us at the time anyway, I was like in my 50s, but a lot of my teammates were in their 60s or 70s. And it was interesting because it actually, I never thought it was going to help me build a network. But I met like a former war correspondent from CNN.
Wow.
Who had retired and was telling me all these amazing, interesting stories. And, I met former VPs of tech companies. So it was kind of a surprise, a pleasant surprise that even by playing competitive tennis, I got to actually meet, really amazing people.
That is a great story. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Really interesting conversation.
Thank you so much.